Hi, I'm Sterling, and I'm going to give a kind of quick review on pedagogy of the oppressed. I think it's the one thing that Paulo Freire points out. It's pedagogy of the oppressed, not for the oppressed, and I think that just emphasizes exactly that it's something that's coming. It's of the oppressed people, not but for them. Kind of reiterating what he's talking about with the oppressor and the oppressed and what happens. So I think it's important. It was really important to have a title like that. One of the things that it talks a lot about is conscientiation. I know it's like a Portuguese word, but what that basically is, it's it's conscientiation is for it's a term for the oppressor to become critically conscious of the societal components that oppress them. So, and when they become critically conscious through conscientiation, then they can question some of the things that go along in society that might oppress them. And I think that it should be taught, as Paulo Freire, through education, and then also through other things too. But one of the things that he opposes that's kind of like the opposite of critical consciousness is the banking approach, and how that serves for the oppressed people not to really understand their what's going on around them. Like it says in the book, it's kind of like depositing information, and then the people just regurgitate it without any thought. Like, for instance, like they don't know why 2 times 2 is 4. They may know that 2 times 2 is 4, but they may not know why. And in order to be able to be more critically conscious, they need to, as discussed in the book, they need to have a lot more dialogue about some of these generative topics. Dialogue with each other, like question, understanding the historical components or background, to create their own reality, because history is reality. It makes you understand what is going on around you, and it helps you understand what oppresses some people and what things that need to be done. Anti-dialogics, wants to talk about conquest and division, manipulation, and cultural invasion, whereas dialogics wants to or focuses on collaboration, union, organization, and cultural synthesis. As it talks about that in education, we need to look at it as more of as a free to think. With education, sometimes in America, is that education is not really freedom to think here in America, and so through conscientiations or critical consciousness, I think it's important for us to understand our social surroundings through the historical background. And one of the questions I'd like to ask is it when we're in a situation when a teacher is trying to teach more consciousness and encouraging the students to be critical thinkers, and it may be opposed to maybe the school curriculum, or kind of like the video that we saw in class about how the type of teaching is you can only follow a certain type of teaching. How does one deal with that in in the United States, or in an education system where the faculty, or I don't know, the principal may say you can't do it that way? Is there a way to approach it where you can oppose them, or is there a way that you can get around that? Hi, my other book that I'd like to talk about is Writings for Liberation Psychology by Ignacio Martin-Burro. I think it's very interesting, first of all, that he did study in the United States and got the doctorate at, I think, the University of Chicago. And he stayed in El Salvador even during the Civil War, which was very dangerous, and he ultimately died there because he stayed there. But I think he stayed there because definitely practiced what he preached. One of the things that's really interesting that I thought about is, as opposed to a pedagogy of the oppressed, to use for a pedagogy from the oppressed. First of all, he wrote several articles, and they're categorized in 3 different things: the psychology of politics, the war and trauma, and de-ideologizing reality. And one thing that I think is interesting about the policy of of politics is he talks about how the American psychological approach doesn't really emphasize like a world psychology. It just is very capitalistic, and so he talks about several types of psychologies, like scientific psychology versus psychology with soul, humanistic psychology versus materialistic psychology, and reactionary psychology versus progressive psychology. I also think it's interesting because he did stay in El Salvador, that he wanted to work among the oppressed to help them, create a critical consciousness or have conscientization so they can have a critical consciousness about their surroundings, because that way was probably the best way that could help his country. When he's talking about de-ideologicizing reality, I think of mystification, and how even our world in the United States, we are told like half truths about certain things so that we don't really realize the reality, and by questioning those things, or in other words, problematizing, I think that's what it is, problematizing, we can ask certain questions, such as problematization. I'm sorry, who is making the statement, so we can identify where are these things, these ideas are coming from. Who is he or she making it for? Why is the statement being made here and now? Whom does the statement benefit and whom does it harm? I think those are good questions to help us understand when we're in like for instance, when we're in a bad economic crisis and then we lose a job, automatically we blame ourselves because the ideas are very individualistic. It's kind of a mystification of what's really the truth. But through problematization and asking these questions that I just said, we can kind of figure out, what is really happening to us. And another type of thing I would like to ask you is to kind of avoid this, to kind of de-ideologize what's going on. What are some other questions that you can ask yourself or others to really find out the truth of, to be a critical thinker? The last book I want to talk about is Doing Psychology Critically. It's a book on teaching us how to approach psychology critically, its history, how to implicate it in such. And one of the things that I like what this book mainly talks about is it criticizes the conventional psychology, and it ignores, or it's saying that conventional psychology deliberately ignores the power struggle between classes, both on a personal, relational, and collective level. It talks about that each different level, has its different well-beings, and in a critical psychological approach, if you were to do it in that way, the personal well-being you would find self-determination, protection of health, caring, and compassion. In relational, you'd find means to collaborate, democratic participation, respect for diversity. And collective, you would find support, like community support, structures, and social justice. Now these things, they all interact with each other, and they basically start on a collective approach, and they can influence all the way down to relational to personal. And not only do these it talks about in this book how they interact, but they work in different contexts, not only in a clinical or a counseling, but in an educational setting, in a health setting, community setting, and in work setting. And then learning how to critically think and figure out like a good praxis, kind of like to help the social situation through critical thinking. You can figure out a better approach for society. It talks about you need to be aware of the cultural context, its needs, and like have a vision and how they interact with each other. And then you need to take action for that, and it's just kind of like a circle to help better society. And I think in order for us to critically think more and to help the poverty people to understand their social context and help them understand, they can figure out what's going on in their lives, and they can better their situation. And kind of like it says, we can help each other in a collectivistic way to separate these oppressors and the oppressed. You can't do it individualistically. but you need help in a social way because we are social animals. And doing psychology critically is it really takes a very activistic approach to psychology, critical thinking. It's and it talks about, or examples are Pablo Freire and a few other people, and they have these certain type of qualities. These how they critique oppression and such. Now these qualities, which are very activistic, could these qualities actually be taught in a graduate program? Or is it just part of the personality, and should that be required to have these types of qualities that Pablo Freire and some of these other people with critical pedagogy? Should that be a requirement? Should it be required before you go into a graduate program? Just something to think about. I don't know if I feel that critical psychology is the only approach to do so. I understand that this banking approach, like in the education system, and as far as maybe my society from the United States works, does kind of reiterate the oppressor and the oppressed. But I think there's some good things that come from that situation, and not only critical pedagogy and critical consciousness would work, but integrating some of the other things. Like, I think there's something good about memorization and kind of the baking approach. I don't believe that only like critical thinking and critical pedagogy and critical consciousness and those types of things are the only way to help the oppressed and fix the oppressor or an oppressed situation. But I think it's a huge aspect that needs to be integrated into our society today. But I also feel that there's good from both of them. So in my view, I think it's great to learn about it. I'm not totally agree with it, but at the same time, I think it's immensely important so that we can help the oppressed.